Hello, and welcome to this lesson on choral vocabulary, the anatomy of singing. Now, I'm not going to get super into the weeds on this, partly because it's not my area of expertise, but I do know enough to at least get us going on some of these things and help you understand how to be a better singer because you understand how the different parts of the voice work. Okay, now, in order to understand how our voices work, we, of course, have to do a little digging on how, just like where all the air comes from. Okay, so we're just gonna go through some of the different parts of your voice and how we phonate. Phonate means like how you make sound. Okay, so I think most of us probably know this, but where the voice starts, of course, is with the air, and where the air comes from is your lungs. Okay, well, the air comes from outside your body, but you got to bring the air in and then breathe it back out. So the lungs are these organs that are inside our body. They are approximately the size of a football, and they weigh 1.5 to 2 pounds. When they're dried out, they kind of look like sponges, right? They're not just big balloons in there. They're actually kind of like sponges, and the air comes in and it fills all these different cavities, right? Way more like little tendrily kinds of things in your lungs than what we can see here. But it's really important to remember that lungs are organs. Okay, they are not muscles. Muscles are able to contract and relax all on their own. Organs do not. Lungs do not move all on their own. They require another muscle to do the active work for them. Okay, and that muscle that they require is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is this muscle that sits below the lungs, and it moves up and down. Okay, when it moves down, it creates a vacuum inside your chest that the air can then fill. When it moves up, it expels the air. It makes the space smaller, so the air has to come out. That's like a really kind of different concept in the way many of us grow up thinking about how we breathe. We think about sucking air in and pushing air out or blowing air out. It's not really exactly how it works. Okay, when we breathe in and the diaphragm moves down, we're creating space to draw air into the lungs. And when the diaphragm moves up, we're expelling the air from the lungs. So it all kind of goes back to like some basic physics, where air is always going to want to move from a high pressure to a low pressure. Or if we have a pressure differential, meaning that the pressure on one side of a barrier is higher than the other side, that air from the higher side is going to want to move to the lower side. So one thing you could think about is like in a spaceship, when a rocket ship, a spaceship goes up into space, that spaceship is the higher pressure area inside a low pressure area. And if you think of like a hole being struck inside a spaceship, the air is going to want to move from inside the spaceship to outside of the spaceship. It's going to go out. Or kind of in a different situation, right at the bottom of the ocean, if you have a submarine at the bottom of the ocean, the high pressure is now outside the submarine in the water, and the lower pressure is inside the submarine with the air that we're breathing. And so if there's a hole in the submarine, the water is going to want to go from outside into inside. It always goes from high pressure to low pressure. So if you think of the way we breathe, if you're bringing the diaphragm down, it's creating a low pressure space inside your lungs. And then the air is going to want to move from the higher pressure, which is outside of your body, into the lower pressure space. So you're creating a vacuum, you're creating outer space inside your body. And the air is going to want to move into that low pressure space until it's filled. Then when your diaphragm moves up, you are creating a higher pressure space inside your body, and the air is going to move out into the room around you. Okay, so that's a thing to remember about breathing, is we're not sucking air in. The air is actually filling the space. Okay. The way that I like to to think about this and make it real for us is, instead of, I want you to practice doing this. You're going to suck air in right now. Okay, so think about like sucking air in through a straw. It takes a while. Okay, try sucking air in through like a slightly bigger straw. Right, we make that kind of that wind sound, right, when we try to do that. Now, instead of thinking about sucking air in, I want you to think about you're creating space in your lungs. Your diaphragm is moving down. You're creating space, and you're just letting the air in. You don't need to do any work to bring the air in. The air wants to come in. Okay, so on 3, then you're just going to think about making a big space, and the air's just going to come in. 1, 2, 3. There. I got a really full breath instantly with no extra sound, just because I made space for it and the air wanted to come in, right? I didn't force it to come in. The air wanted to come in because low pressure in here, higher pressure out here, right? So, okay, the air is in our lungs, then it moves up. This is our trachea. Okay, some people often confuse the trachea with the esophagus, right? The esophagus is where the food go. The trachea is where the air go. So when your lungs, when you're breathing in and out, or rather than when the air is being taken in and out, it's moving through the trachea, across your larynx, and through your vocal cords. So this lesson is mostly focused on how does this kind of stuff affect our breathing. How does it affect our singing and our phonation? Phonation is how we make sounds. And so that air is coming across our vocal cords. When we are, there's 2 different names. Okay, there's 2 different names. We have vocal folds, vocal cords. They're effectively the same thing. I like to use vocal folds more than vocal cords, okay, because cords, chords kind of makes us think of like guitar strings, where the string is vibrating all on its own outside of anything. Vocal folds are not just they're not just hanging there. Okay, they're attached to different things. They're attached to our muscles inside our larynx. So I like to use vocal folds because I think it more accurately describes what's happening. When we're breathing, the vocal folds are open. Okay, just taking in air. When we are speaking or singing or humming or making any kind of sound, when we're phonating, they close and they vibrate against each other. Okay, so sometimes I like to think of I put my hands like this, and they're like kind of vibrating against each other. If I could do this, touch my hands together 440 times per second, I would get an A. Okay, so that's how fast they're vibrating. It's just when we're talking, when we're singing, they're vibrating at different frequencies, different speeds against each other, really, really quickly, and making sound. And so rather than a string, like on a guitar, okay, rather than like a string, or on a piano where the string is disconnected from anything and vibrating, they're vibrating against each other. It's more like the bow against the string is more like how, if you think of like a violin or a cello or a viola or a bass, right? That the string going across the bow going across the string, that's more like our vocal folds vibrating against each other than like plucking a guitar string. Okay, so this is kind of like our what makes the sound. Okay. This is our sound maker. And then after that, the sound moves into our head, and you resonate inside your head, inside your mouth, your nose, your mask, your soft palate. We're not going to get into that on this one because we're really just talking about how the sound is made. But all that stuff goes into how the tone is made for your voice. Okay, so we've got the vibrator down here, and then the resonator up here. It's like the violin string, and then the body of the violin is up there. Okay, here's just another diagram of the vocal folds. Now, all of these pictures, right? They're like this, right? Like this. But really, the vocal folds are like that inside your body. Okay. Like that, not up and down, but it's just, it doesn't look like much on a diagram if it's like that. So we show them like that, but they're really rotated in there. Okay. some of these things we're going to come up with later, but it's just a little bit of a different diagram of what things look like. Okay, there opens more in the back, more closed in the front of your body, right? This down here is like your kind of like your tongue, I guess. Oh, it says base of tongue, so there you go. Okay, so that's the vocal folds themselves. Now, if you compare these last pictures and this one, right, where the vocal folds are these kind of these white bone-looking things. They're not bones. They're not bones. Okay. But that's what is in this diagram. Okay, because I want to draw your attention to these two muscles. These two muscles are super important for phonation and singing. Okay, highlighted in red, the long one is called the thyroarytenoid muscle, but we usually call it the TA. And some people who can't remember TA, like this guy, okay, we call it the heavy muscle. Okay, and that's in red. The heavy muscle, the way muscles work, muscles can only contract and relax. They can't push. Okay, so you can only have a muscle that like stretches out and then relaxes. You can't have a muscle that's like, so we have to have two different muscles to control high and low sounds in our body. Okay, the TA or heavy muscle is responsible for the low sounds. What that's going to do is it's going to contract and pull this vocal fold so it's shorter and thicker. Okay, so if you think of like a marshmallow, okay, like taking a marshmallow and you go, right? That's kind of what the TA muscle does, right? You can think of that marshmallow getting shorter and a little bit rounder, right? A little bit thicker. That's what our TA muscle is doing. And if you think about shorter, rounder is going to make our voices lower. So the TA muscle or heavy muscle controls a lot of what we do with our chest voice. And mostly our speaking voice is handled with the TA or heavy muscle. On the flip side is our cricothyroid muscle or CT muscle, or, well, we can't remember letters in random combinations, it's the light muscle. Okay. There's a little bit of problem with using heavy and light because it gets us into some issues when we're singing, but these are the words kind of that we have that are more commonly used. The blue ones, the highlighted in blue, are the CT muscles. Okay, and we have them on both sides. There's no red muscle marked on this side, but it's there. Okay. So the one that's highlighted in blue is the cricothyroid or the CT or the light muscle, and that controls the higher notes. So you can think of it over here is it's stretching things out. Actually, it wraps around and stretches things out. So it makes your voice higher. It makes the vocal folds longer and thinner. Okay, to handle your high notes. So the TA muscle or heavy muscle, low notes. The CT or light muscle, the high notes. Now, the reason these are really important to know is that these are what controls how we get into chest voice and head voice. Okay, we use a mixture, a combination of them, but the CT muscle, or sorry, the TA, I have a hard time remembering things. The TA muscle, which is the heavy muscle, that's what we're most usually for our chest voice. Okay, and the CT muscle is usually used for head voice, raising the pitch. When you experience a break, it's because your body is having a hard time transitioning from the heavy muscle into the light muscle. Okay, that is what, when you feel that break in your range, okay, usually for some people it's like right around the middle of the treble clef if you're a treble singer. It's because you're transitioning from the heavy muscle into the light muscle, and one muscle's all of a sudden taking over and the other muscle's relaxing. When we work on blend, we are working from going from the heavy muscle into the light muscle, and that the muscles are working together, and you get that through practice. And so that is how these things associate with each other. So instead of saying chest voice, head voice, sometimes it can be useful to say like, and you need to be using your light muscle, your light mechanism for this one, or getting your heavier mechanism. Falsetto, that voice, right, is achieved by creating a tauter vocal fold and only the edges vibrate. Because it uses a different mechanism, there's often a break from your normal voice into your falsetto. So if I cascade down, and you heard that break across my falsetto, that's because only a little portion of it. It's a completely different mechanism. Only a little bit of it is vibrating, and it's very, very, very different than the rest of my voice and the rest of like my modal voice. So when I cascade down like that, you hear that little flip into the rest of my voice. Okay, and that's why, because it's two very different mechanisms. There are also, not always, but often, a gap in your vocal folds when you're in falsetto. La. The purer the sound of someone's falsetto, so you get like a falsettist, like a Justin Timberlake who sings in their falsetto a lot. They have a really pure falsetto. It's because they're able to achieve full vocal closure when they're singing in falsetto, versus someone who has a really breathy falsetto, and often younger people do. There's a little bit of a gap in their falsetto, and that's letting extra air through, and you run out of air faster, and it's just a little bit of a breathier sound in the falsetto. A lot of people wonder about voice cracks. Voice crack is a sudden loss of fine motor control over the muscles in your larynx, okay? You can go really high all of a sudden, blah, blah, blah. You can go opposite, la, 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 right? Like it just jumps all of a sudden. Or your voice can suddenly disappear. This happens to me a lot, where my voice cracks and all of a sudden the sound goes away, right? Like it happens to me, especially when I'm a little bit nervous talking to a microphone, which is very common. There can be lots of causes for voice cracks. Your vocal folds are changing length during puberty. You could be just tired. You could be dehydrated. You could be stressed out, which is what happens to me when I'm on a microphone and my voice just disappears. But that's a voice crack. Or just because you're sick, right? Any kinds of things where you have tension. Okay, when you have tension in your vocal folds, and or your body's getting used to new length of vocal folds, but all of a sudden your body, things just get misaligned, right? It's like tripping, right? Like just like when you are all of a sudden you hit a growth spurt and your legs are a completely different size and you trip a lot more because all your coordination is off. It's the same kind of thing for your voice. Your vocal folds are just, they kind of slip a little bit. It's not exactly that dramatic, but they kind of fall over themselves, and then all of a sudden you're in a different octave. Or they're tired, or you're stressed, right? And when you're stressed, we carry tension usually. And if you're really anxious, you're carrying tension, and your muscles are tight. And if your muscles are tight, because your muscles are what's controlling, right? If all of a sudden you're normally talking in your TA muscle, and then you're tight, and your CT muscle takes over for a second, and then it goes back to TA, there, you just got a voice crack. Congratulations. They're super common, happens to everybody, happens to adults, happens to me, happens to little tiny kids, all these things. You often hear it with younger folks when they're yelling, and all of a sudden their voice cracks. It's because their vocal strain is going to make that happen. Okay, those vocal folds, air is flowing up through them. How do they come together? The muscles help with the pitch, but in order for them to come together, they have to have air flowing through them. Okay, the air flows through them and it brings them together. It's actually similar to how an airplane takes off, where you create an air pressure differential and then it lifts the plane. Okay, right? You've got your wing here. You got an air pressure differential and it creates lift. Now we're not going to fly by singing high enough or fast enough or whatever, but when you've got air coming up through them, it's gonna pull those vocal folds together and then vibrate them. Okay, so you need two things. You need airflow and you need an air pressure differential, okay, which is just like what happens with the lungs and the diaphragm, right? We create that air pressure differential and the air comes in or out. Same idea. But this time it's bringing the air, the vocal folds together to vibrate against each other. So if you are singing with plenty of airflow and a good air pressure differential, which is not the same as like applying pressure, but it's creating a strong pressure underneath your vocal folds, that means that they'll be brought together and you will get more tone. Versus if you don't have enough airflow and there's less air pressure, your vocal folds won't meet and you'll get a breathy tone. Okay, which some singers use all the time, right? And I have no judgment on it. It's good to know how to do both. Okay? That's the bottom line. It's good to know how to do both. So here's a lot of air pressure, right? I've got plenty of tone in my voice. I'm maxing out my microphone. Versus less air pressure, a breathier tone is like that. Okay, you're going to run out of air faster, and over the long haul, it dries your vocal folds out. Not great for you. Okay? It's not great for your voice to be breathy all the time. You'll get fatigued faster. You will run out of air faster. Okay, so it's kind of paradoxical, right? Less airflow, breathier, run out of air faster. That's why I like to think about air pressure differential rather than just airflow. But we often call it breath support. Okay, breath support is the commonly used term for this. What we're really talking about is creating an air pressure difference. All right, let's get into voice changes, also known as puberty, but also include other hormonal changes, right? Such as hormone therapy or menopause if you're an older adult who menstruates, right? So this is voice changes caused by hormonal changes, okay? Puberty's effect on voices. We all know that our voices change a lot as we go through puberty. Okay, so if you're going to be a future tenor or bass, your vocal folds are going to lengthen front to back. Okay, your vocal folds will grow about 68%, approximately. That's an average right there. Range drops about an octave, and the range can rise a sixth as well. It's like it drops and rises at the same time, but it drops more than rising, right? So you end up with an overall lower voice, but the range is expanded. If you're a future soprano or alto, your vocal folds will get rounder in height and width. Rounder in height, that means longer. Okay, they don't grow quite as long though. Okay, just a little bit longer, and the range drops down a third and rises about a third. So you end up with a more full and darker sounding voice. And here is the average measurements for typical vocal fold length. Okay, we've got an infant, so a little baby, has 6 to 8 millimeters. A child, 9 to 15. An adult, soprano, alto, 9 to 13. So you can see how like sometimes it can, our top is our longest is a little bit shorter for the adult, because that child longer one probably is going to be an adult tenor or bass. Remember, the longer the vocal fold, the lower the voice. Okay, so that's why you see an adult soprano has on average shorter vocal fold length than an adult. Okay, some reference for these lengths. I don't have a nickel or a dime near me, so sorry about that. But I do have pencils. Okay, 7 millimeters is the width of a pencil, right here. So a baby's vocal folds, right, are on average about the width of a pencil. That's very, very small, right? So you imagine the width of a pencil in there. And then an adult soprano alto, it's about double that. And so let me get 2 pencils out here. Okay. That's about how long adult vocal folds are. Super small. Usually when we see videos of vocal folds, because you can see videos, I'm gonna let you look that up on your own. They look a lot bigger because it's zoomed in, right? But they're very, very short. And you can also see in here how, right, the adult tenor bass one, it drops a lot, it gets a lot bigger. Still pretty small, but it is bigger. Okay, here, puberty's effects on voices. We know most of these, just anecdotally, but growth spurts and thickening of the vocal folds result in misalignment. That's what I was talking about earlier, right? Where you're thinking about walking, and all of a sudden your legs are longer and you trip. That is the vocal misalignment, and that's what causes voice cracks, or sometimes just like raspiness in voices. It requires reassertion of muscle control skills needed for speech and singing. So that is us working on. You don't have to like really think about it, but practicing talking slowly, practicing talking with good tone, singing, those things through puberty really actually help a lot. Excess air will get through. So sometimes you get younger people have a husky or breathier vocal sound, and then it goes away as you get older. And then onset of menstruation can contribute to vocal fold swelling, vocal fatigue, loss of power, hoarseness, loss of range and agility, all the fun stuff, right? So menstruation, I shouldn't have just said onset. I mean, like, it keeps going for as long as menstruation lasts through your life, right? For some people it affects them more, for some people it affects them less. But you can kind of just attribute it, right? You think about going through puberty as this big hormonal change. When you're having hormonal swings through menstruation, it's going to cause a lot of similar problems. I shouldn't call them problems. It's just similar things that are happening to you. I think a lot of singers would probably think of them as problems, but the way I like to think of it is like, you know, sometimes you're going to be sick. Sometimes you're going to be menstruating. Sometimes sometimes you just didn't get enough sleep, right? Our voices are fluctuate so much. I have this digital piano here. This thing does not change day to day, right? I can play a note. It's going to be that note. Sometimes it breaks, and that's very expensive, but it's not going to be changing because of the weather, right? So our voices are different though. Our voices change a lot day to day, and you have to deal with it as a singer. And if you can play well, if you can sing well, even when things are not working 100%, imagine what you're going to be when they are feeling great. Well, what happens when I'm sick? Speaking of not feeling great. Okay, when you're sick, you get extra mucus on your vocal folds. Gross. Your vocal folds get swollen. That's kind of the biggest thing. Okay, they get swollen. Think about it this way. Okay, here's my vocal folds. They're very big right now. Okay, they're vibrating against each other really, really well. Okay, but when you're sick, okay, when you're sick, it's like you got those puffy sleeves, right? And they can be vibrating each other, but there's going to be some extra stuff here that's going to make it hard for the air to get out. Okay? And if you got mucus in there, then you got globules in there and everything's trying to vibrate. And it's not going to be super comfortable. Okay? Your throat might get sore when you're sick, right? You often hear a lot of people saying like, my throat's sore and I can't sing. Your throat is sore. That's true. And you're having trouble singing, but you've got to remember that your throat is different than your larynx. They're different things. Your larynx is swollen. Your throat is sore, but it's not the same thing. Some people say, like, what if I drink a bunch of honey when my throat is sore? Go for it for your throat. But if the honey was able to touch your larynx, you would be choking and aspirating honey. Okay, so it's different stuff. You can't drink honey to make your vocal folds feel better. You can do something warm, and the proximity of the warmth might help things feel better. But you could also just hold a warm pack up. Like it's not. They're different tubes. You always have to remember they're different tubes. You can have vocal injuries, calluses. So that's like if you think about this, and there's like a ball here and a ball here. Okay, usually they're in pairs because it's where your vocal folds are hitting each other in an injurious way. Those keep your vocal folds from coming together fully. Vocal polyps, which are like blisters. Vocal fold paralysis, which is when one side doesn't move, or maybe both sides don't move. That's usually caused by an injury to your head, neck, or chest, or a complication from surgery. And then there can be a hemorrhage, and that's really bad news. Okay, that's when you've got bleeding, sudden loss of voice. You should go to a doctor if this kind of thing, if you feel like this is happening. You may have been reading here, right? Vocal polyps can rise from a single event caused by screaming or yelling. The hemorrhage, sustained periods of vocal abuse like sustained yelling. This is why you do not want to be screaming, okay? Especially not for sustained periods of time. You can really hurt yourself just from one super, super loud scream can get you. And then if you're yelling for a long time, like at a sporting event, if you're yelling for like an hour, like scream at the top of your lungs, you can all of a sudden lose your voice and you can be bleeding, and it's really bad. Okay, so please take care of your voices. Learn how to project rather than scream. All right, what should you remember from this beautiful lesson? Your voice is part of your body, and it will change just as you change. There's nothing wrong with your voice changing. It's natural. Your voice doesn't really settle until you are like in your early to mid 20s. And then it only settles for about, I don't know, settles is a fraught term. It only settles for like a decade or something, maybe 20 years, and then your body's gonna start undergoing different changes again. So your body's always changing is what I'm trying to say. And your voice is part of that. So just embrace where you're at right now and work on it where you're at right now. Your breathing, your pitch, your tone quality are all about physics. Okay, you have to remember it's all about physics. I mean, your mood and your biology is going to change all that, but the way that the breathing works high pressure, low pressure. Your pitch changes. It's the vocal folds getting longer and shorter. Your tone quality is about, are we sending air through the vocal folds and creating an air pressure differential? It's all physics, ultimately, about what we hear. Okay, and then not even to mention the sound waves as they move out of our body. And then remember that we can all work on our technique to shape our voices just like any other instrument. The only weird thing about the voice is that it changes size, changes shape day to day sometimes. Okay? You know, sometimes when kids learn how to play violin, they've got like a small scale violin because they're small and it fits their body, and they get bigger and they get a bigger one, and they get bigger and they get a bigger one. It's kind of like that, except sometimes with our voices, it'd be like if you practiced on the small scale one and then the next day you had a viola and then the next day you had another small scale one. Like, it's a little bit more like that. But that's part of the fun of it, right? Is some days you got a different kind of instrument. Okay. Here are some resources that I recommend. The Owner's Manual to the Voice by Rachel Gates is kind of a more intense book. Let's see if I can find it here. I don't have a copy of the Owner's Manual to the Voice by Rachel Gates here with me. I do have The Diagnosis and Correction of Vocal Faults by James McKinney. That's a cool book. It's a little bit older, but it gets pretty technical, just like Owner's Manual to the Voice does too. Owner's Manual to the Voice has a lot of diagrams and a lot of intense terminology, but if you're really into that stuff and you memorize those kinds of things well, I think they're valuable. It's valuable to look at. Diagnosis and Correction of Vocal Faults is great. And then Thinking Outside the Voice Box, I think, is one of my favorite books for learning about this kind of stuff, by Bridget Sweet. She's really good at talking about these things in a way that is understandable even to a layperson that doesn't know all of the techniques. Plus, there's a little bit more about, it's a lot more about adolescent voice change. And then there's a little bit about hormonal changes, menopausal changes, and a little bit of hormone therapy kinds of stuff too. So I'd highly recommend some of these books, but especially Thinking Outside the Voice Box, I think, is very valuable. That is all I've got for this lesson on vocal anatomy. I hope it was helpful. You know, I'm sure that there are some gaps in here, but I think that this will get you somewhere along the path to knowing how your voice works and how to use it to be the most effective singer and speaker that you can be. So that's it for today. Thank you so much.